Hey, welcome to today's NFDI talk. Today's speaker is Neil Murray. He's a research associate at the German Institute for Economic Research, where he manages the RDCnet project. He's also a PhD candidate in economics at the Freie Universität Berlin. His research interests lie at the intersection of behavioral economics, particularly in exploring risk attitudes and decision-making under uncertainty. So welcome, the floor is yours.
All right, so first off, let me share my slides. Okay, I think you should see everything now.
Yes, perfect.
All right, perfect. Thank you very much for the introduction. I can pretty much skip that part now, I think. So first off, again, I'm a PhD student in behavioral economics. That's not really the focus today. I want instead to present a project which is called the RDCnet, which I'm mainly coordinating within the socioeconomic panel, which is a department of the German Institute for Economic Research. So first off, the RDCnet is developed as part of the consort SWD, which is the consortium for the social, behavioral, educational, and economic sciences. Quite a long name. So in the future, you will probably find it under NFDI for society, at least the subtitle. And yeah, so just one disclaimer. So if I say something like our disciplines or something like that in this presentation, I refer to those four disciplines. And that's pretty much it. So I know there are many different disciplines who will also listen here at NFDITalks, so I think it's important to clarify that at the start. And yeah, what is the RDCnet in a nutshell? So it is a service or it's a project that aims to improve and ease the access to sensitive research data within our discipline. And it aims to do so by reducing location dependencies. And what I mean by that is in our current situation, users or researchers usually have to travel to specific institutions to research data centers that provide that data. And then they have to travel to their location, and there they usually are so-called secured workplaces. Those are terminals, computers within data secure rooms, so everything is kind of controlled and monitored, so it's a very safe environment, and there the users can make their analysis. So the good thing about this is it is very secure. So sensitive data is treated as such, and there's not really a way to kind of for data breaches because it's only analyzed locally. But this also means that, well, analyzing data is quite costly for researchers because they have to travel across Germany. Usually they have to stay a few days and book hotels and so on. So it's not very ideal. It's quite costly. And the RDCnet picks up this issue and tries to kind of minimize the burden. So what we aim to do is we want to foster collaborations between all those research data centers in Germany in a way that they connect their secure workplaces, which they have within one network of data access points, so that researchers in the end have more freedom on choosing where they want to work with the data. So it will still be a secured environment, but maybe just not at a particular institution that provides the data, but instead a different institution which might be closer for the researchers to reach. And this is pretty much the idea. It probably sounds abstract, especially if you're not maybe familiar with working with research data in our discipline. So let me allow in the first few slides to give you more context on the project, the consortium, but most importantly on what does it look like if you want to work with sensitive research data within our disciplines. All right. Let me start by giving you some more general information about the consortium and our project. So Consort SWD is a consortium that generally aims to enhance data accessibility, findability, usability, management, and so on within the disciplines I just mentioned. And it does so by providing different services and projects to also different target groups. So there might be measures and projects that are aimed towards researchers themselves. For instance, there are programming packages they can use to easier analyze or process data. There is maybe training material that can be utilized to easily understand working with the research data. But the consortium also provides measures, projects, and content to research data and institutions. So that could be, for instance, standardized contracts, data usage contracts, which they can be used to minimize legal work. They can use online forums, for instance, to facilitate exchange between researchers, other institutions. They could also use it as means to answer support requests. So there are many different services that are aimed towards researchers and institutions. And generally, there are 5 or task areas, which would be stated here. And within these task areas, there are a total of 23 measures. The RDCnet is one of those measures, and that belongs to the task area of data access. So we can also have a short look on the timeline. So Concert SVD started its service in October 2020, so during the Corona pandemic. And a few months later, so in April 21, this is when we started with the RDCnet project and the service development. And during this phase, which is still ongoing, so we are currently here, we mainly work together with 8 different partner institutions to pretty much build a prototype network, a pilot study that tries to make this whole thing work. And the first funding period will end in September 25, so a few months to go, but we're definitely closing in to an end. But I should also mention that we did apply with the consortium for a second funding phase, and that's still pending, so there has not been made a decision yet, but if it would be accepted, that would start in October 25. All right, I think you don't need to know more about the general information on consortium and the project. So let's be a little bit more specific on what we consider as sensitive research data within our discipline. So first off, if we consider our disciplines, usually we are talking about microdata on individual levels. And most cases, they comprise interviews, surveys, experiments, and so on. And by nature, that kind of microdata is usually very personal and sensitive. So it could contain objective information such as income, wealth, information on inheritances, information on your children, your partner. It can also contain more subjective information such as your attitudes towards political parties, your well-being. And so if we combine all of those information, we get usually data sets that, again, are very sensitive and hold personal information. So these kind of data will always be anonymized. So obviously, for each observations, there will never be a name of the respondents given. It will always be an ID. But still, we have to differentiate this kind of anonymized data. So first off, we have so-called scientific use file. And that kind of data will usually never contain any variables or indicators that would allow researchers to re-identify the respondents. And this kind of data can usually be downloaded directly from the research data centers if you have a data usage agreement and so on. And then you can download it and analyze it from home. Today, and for the RDCnet, we are not really interested in that kind of data because, well, you can analyze it from home. There's no real need to improve access to that kind of data. Instead, we talk about the data we consider as really sensitive, and that's data that usually contains some indicators that would allow for identification. Let's make an example. We have a survey, and in that survey, we have a variable that contains the municipality where a respondent lives. So that alone might not be very sensitive. However, if you combine that, for instance, with the information on a job, and you know that the person is a heart surgeon, there might only be one heart surgeon within a municipality, and then you can re-identify that person quite easily. So, and whenever data contains that kind of information, that's usually geographical indicators, then we consider that data as very sensitive, and we have very strict data security regulations for that kind of data, which usually state that the institutions that provide that data cannot, or the data is not allowed to physically leave the servers of those institutions, which again means that researchers have to travel to those institutions. And then we have so-called secure workplaces. I already mentioned that. Those are usually just small computer terminals, thin clients, whatever you call them. They are configured very restrictively. So usually you can just open some software you need for the analysis, let it be statistical software, and you can make your analysis at those kind of sterile environments. And you can also not download or export anything. So you finish your work, you come up with your tables, figures, whatever you need. And if you're done with that, you can ask for an export request. Then the data providing institution will still check if there's any information in your results that could re-identify respondents. And if not, only then will you basically receive your figures and tables that you derived from the analysis. So this is pretty much a process for most of the data sets within our disciplines. Again, the good thing is it's very secure. The bad thing, again, researchers have to travel. So let's look at the situation in Germany more broadly. Maybe a small disclaimer first. Currently, we're aiming on a national network in Germany. So some of the content in this presentation will be stated in German. I'm sorry for that, but I think from the context, it will be quite clear. So one definition I will probably say a few times more often will be RDC, which is a research data center, and NFDZ is just the German translation. Okay, so let's look at the landscape in Germany. What we have here is a map of all the research data centers that are accredited by the consortium. And there are a lot of them, which is really nice. And most of them provide their own data. Most of them have their own data secure rooms and secure workplaces. So again, if a researcher lives in Munich and he wants to work with data in Berlin, well, he has to travel to the RDCs in Berlin. However, if we look at the situation, we have kind of a very good fundament to make collaborations because all of those RDCs have a secure environment. So what we are thinking with the RDCnet, why shouldn't the researcher work from a secure environment in Munich and remotely access data from an RDC in Berlin? In that case, the data is still being analyzed within a secure environment. And if you use the proper remote access softwares or systems such as remote desktop systems, then the data will also never physically leave those servers. And in the end, if we manage that, we kind of have a quite good situation where researchers have many access points theoretically, and all the RDCs could provide their data at many more access points as well, which in the end would first reduce costs for researchers. And on the other hand, it can improve the data usage for the RDCs, because if there are more access points, you will probably get more researchers to being able to work with your data. So if we concluded what we want to do as the RDCnet is we want to provide a legal framework, an organizational framework, necessary services that allow all those RDCs to make collaborations with each other in a way that they can use each other's secure workplaces and access data remotely. This is the fundamental concept of the RDCnet. So let's be a little more precise. Saying we have this RDCA, what we want in the RDCnet is that every institute or research data center that wants to participate in the network has to provide one additional terminal workspace computer within their data secure room. And this one thin client or terminal should be dedicated for users of the RDCnet. And from this terminal, they should then be theoretically able to make remote access connections to all the data providing RDCs. For instance, here RDCB. But I should also spoiler, just when a researcher sits at this terminal, he cannot just make connections to all servers, obviously. He still needs a valid data usage contract, for instance, with RDCB. And only then will RDCB give him his user credentials, the remote access parameters to make the remote access connection. So in the end, it's still quite secure. The data providing RDC still has full control on who's going to access their data and where. And this should be the basically the fundament of the technical solutions in the RDCnet. And I should also highlight that we do not want several bilateral corporations. We say that every institute that participates in the RDC has to provide one of those terminals. So that is the premise for participation. That's the requirement. You set up one additional of those terminals within your data secure room. And then you are allowed to provide your data remotely at all of the participating secure workplaces. The reason for that is that, well, providing your data remotely needs a remote desktop system, and that can be quite costly. It is quite complex to implement. So we cannot really force institutions or RDCs to set it up. But with this solution, we basically say, well, you all provide a workplace, and if you do that, then you're allowed to provide your data remotely. And it also gives like smaller RDCs the opportunity to just set up a secure workplace, which also improves the RDCA's environment, because also the staff members, the researchers that are located at this RDC can use this thin client to access data from different RDCs. So it kind of increases the attractiveness as a research location. And that's pretty much the basic idea. So I have one technical slide, and I will make that short, but I cannot completely go on without saying at least a few things regarding the technical background. So first off, let's consider, what does an RDC needs to do if it wants to participate? And I told that the slide before, it has to implement a secure workplace. In technical terms, this means they have to install one thin client, one computer. They can use whatever they want, basically, for their terminal. But in the end, we have security criteria, and they have to be met. So we define this in a contract. I will talk about the contract later on. But what we basically do is say, well, there are criteria, you have to fulfill them, and you can just set up this thin client, configure it according to our security criteria, and then at the end, it can be used as a secure workplace. On the other side, if you want to provide your data remotely, this is just a little more complex, to be honest. So putting up a remote desktop system can be quite complex. The good thing, maybe one good thing about the corona pandemic, I think many institutions provided remote desktop systems. So there was much of expertise scattered at those institutions. You probably also used one yourself. So it could be Citrix, or VMware Horizon. Those are just the classical remote desktop systems. And in the end, they can be used to provide virtual desktops at a different servers without data physically leaving those servers, which is the neat thing about those systems. So an institution that provides their data remotely has to provide one of those systems. They need to have a proper user management, so with the corresponding rights, so that users can actually access data and analyze them. And in the end, we also work with IP whitelists. So we have a strict list of IPs, and only those IPs should be able to access the servers remotely. In the end, those are, if we just broadly cover it, the technical requirements. And now is the most important thing. We as the RDCnet, we are not gonna provide those technical solutions, because the main thing is most of the RDCs and institutions, they already have systems. They already have structures implemented. So we can't just go there and tell them what to do. So instead, the idea is, I told you that earlier, we have certain criteria, and we tell those RDCs, well, fulfill these criteria with the systems you have. Use the hardware you want, use the software you want. You're kind of responsible for that on your own. And in the end, on the contract, we define the criteria you have to fulfill. And if you fulfill them, you can actually join the RDCnet. I should also mention that we do, in fact, have support. So if RDCs do not have experience, let's say, with setting up a secured workplace, we have guidelines to help them. So that's out of the question. But the most important thing is that they can still rely on their existing structures and build upon them. There is one small exception. We have one compatibility criteria, and that relates to the remote desktop system. Again, if an institute uses one of the big players, that again is Citrix and VMware, it's quite easy for IT staff to implement those remote access connections at the terminals. But if an institute has, let's say, a completely proprietary system they derived on their own, it might be very complex, then it's hard for the IT staff to implement it. So in this way, we said, well, if you use remote desktop systems, you should use one that makes it not very hard for the IT staff to implement the connections. All right, that's it. Enough from the technical sides, but that's just something I had to mention, because now I want to talk about the actual, let's say, content of us, the project RDCnet. What do we actually provide institutions in order to foster those collaborations and build cooperations with each other? So I will briefly mention the blocks of the services we provide, and I will talk more specifically about them in the coming slides. So the first one is support. That I just mentioned. It relates to the point if there are RDCs who do not have technical experiences with setting up secure workplaces, a data secure room, or remote desktop services, we have guidelines and we can help them. We have a system engineer that can also help. So this is what we can offer in technical terms. Then we have the aspect of administration. This is crucial if the network wants to scale. So currently, again, we work mainly together with 8 RDCs, but if the whole network scales, we need to have a centralized administration that takes care first of the legal contracts, that makes that organizes workshops, because if we have to make decisions that affect every participating party, we make them as a collective. So it's important to foster the communication between the participating institutions. And last but not least, what also is contained within the administration, we provide an online booking platform that can then be used by the researchers to make appointments for the secure workplaces that are provided within the RDCnet. And the final and the third, probably the most important part, is a cooperation agreement. So this is often the aspect that hinders some corporations, because, well, you have to define security criteria that are standardized. And what we are doing is we provide a multilateral contract, which means that every institution has to sign this contract, meaning all the criteria we defined in this contract hold for all the institutions the same. And this contract broadly contains 3 main parts. First are the technical organizational measures. Those are pretty much the minimum security standards that hold for the workplace or the terminal, for the data secure room, and also how the staff of the RDC is involved in the whole process if a researcher comes there and wants to work with data from a different institution. Then we have participation requirements. I touched on those earlier. This means that every RDC has to provide 1 additional workplace that is dedicated for the RDCnet. And last but not least, there's a process description. This also sounds trivial, but if you have many RDCs and everyone does thing they want, you end with kind of a chaotic process, especially for the researchers. So what we did is we defined clear guidelines. So from the first step, when a researcher wants to access data, to the last step, when he wants his exported results, there's a clear step-by-step rule what to do and which party is involved in which step. Okay, so these are pretty much the main services we offer. Now let me go into a little bit more detail on those services. So the first is the support, and the part which is written here, like the access of data, this sums up what I already mentioned. What we have is we derived a guideline. This is published on Zenodo as well, so you can look at it. Here's the QR code. And this, again, it's a guideline for IT staff, which clearly states, well, buy this thin client, buy the software, and then follow these steps to configure the client. And in the end, you have a computer that can be used as a secure workplace, given you have a data secure room. And this is what we offer to the RDCs. When it comes to support for the connection, so for the remote desktop systems, again, this is much more complex because there is not really a one-fits-all solution. If an RDC wants to provide remote desktop systems, it really depends on the data they provide. It depends on what softwares do the researchers need. what's the computational power of the analysis that's required. If you work with geodata, that's a lot more, for instance. And so there are many factors which our RDC has to take into account if they provide remote desktop systems. And we, as the RDCnet, we cannot give them the solutions. They need to know what users of their data need. And therefore, what we can do is we can facilitate knowledge exchange between all the IT stuff. We did that before in our pilot study. It worked quite good, so that some RDCs present their remote desktop solutions and we can try to learn from each other. But again, like providing them with one solution and say, well, just use that will not work for remote desktop systems. But still, what we are deriving is a reference system. This will probably be published as well in the beginning next year, also on Zenodo. And what we do within this guideline is also to kind of show one reference system that's based on VMware Horizon, which RDCs can use as a guideline. Again, there is really not a must, and it might not be suited for their data, but we want to at least show a glimpse of what's required to set up such a remote desktop system. All right, so much for the support. Let me say a few things about administration, which I already mentioned. So we see us as kind of the link between all the cooperations partner where things go together. This includes all the legal work. So we administrate the contracts. We include new cooperation partners that want to participate. And again, we will set up workshops that foster the exchange of knowledge between those RDCs. And the second part, which is, it might seem trivial, but it's actually quite important to have a joint booking platform, because most RDCs might have already a booking platform for their local workspaces. But in the RDCnet, if a researcher makes an appointment for a workplace, there will always be two parties involved. So there's this one party who provides the workplace. They have to make sure that the workplace is also available when a researcher wants to go there. And the second party provides the data remotely. And they also have to know about appointment because they provide the remote desktop system, their account, and they have to make sure that the server has enough capacity to manage their analysis. So it needs computational power. And if their servers are already at a capacity, then the researcher might not be able to perform his analysis. So to kind of find a solution for that, we came up with this booking platform. It's already online. I should also mention it might not be perfectly optimized for mobile devices, but I think it still works quite easily. So if a researcher uses that platform, and it's very straightforward. In the first step, they choose from where they want to work with the data. In the second step, they choose which data they want to access, and then they can, in the last step, choose on which date they want to work with the data. And then they make a booking request. And then the neat thing is now this booking request will be sent to the two parties that are involved in this appointment. And the data providing party, that's the one who will then validate or basically confirm or deny the request, because, well, they provide the data. They need to be sure that the researcher has a valid data usage contract, and only then will they confirm the booking. And after it's confirmed, then both parties will basically get the information on the research and also the appointment. So yeah, it works and it is online. You can already have a look at that. All right. Let's come to the pretty much most crucial part, the cooperation agreement. So first off, I already told you that it is a multilateral agreement, because if we make cooperations between RDCs and we would make them bilateral, we would just end up in pure chaos, because all the RDCs might have slightly different expectations on what security criteria look like. And in the end, we have 100 contracts, which would just not be able to manage. So instead, we together with 8 institutions derived one multilateral cooperation agreement, which standardizes those security criteria. We consider them as minimum security criteria, which means that if an RDC might be stricter in their environment, they can be stricter, but they cannot be less strict. And again, it was kind of a we first gathered several criteria from different RDCs in Germany. We kind of standardized them. We looked where those criteria overlapped. We looked for gaps, and like step by step, we in the end came up with this contract. This contract is also published on Zenodo, so you can also have a look at it. Again, I'm sorry that it's currently German. Maybe ChatGPT could help you with the translation, but within this contract, it's pretty clearly stated again what are the security criteria for the room, for the terminal, for the RDC stuff. It defines your responsibilities as a partner, the organizational measures, and so on. So yeah. When I talk about security criteria, I pretty much mean three things. And this is the terminal, which should be configured in a way that it can only be used to start a remote access connections, nothing else. There should be no browser, no other function. It's only there to provide remote access. The secure room, it just defines that it has to be locked. It has to be monitored in some way. You shouldn't be able to look in other researchers' monitors. You shouldn't take your phone or laptop inside. Those are the things that are defined for the secure room. And finally, the RDC staff also plays a pivotal role, because when there's a researcher coming to a different RDC, you have to validate his ID. So you have to make sure that this is the researcher who is actually allowed to enter the data secure room. So there needs to be staff that checks this ID, and also occasionally checks the data secure room if everything is working fine and no one is doing pictures with anything or so on. All right. After the security criteria, there is another step which is important. What do you need to do, or what are the requirements in order to participate in the RDCnet? Well, of course, you have to fulfill the security criteria, but what does it exactly mean? Well, I mentioned this as well. You have to provide one of those workplaces. So every institution that participates will take the role as a data accessing party. We consider that. And optionally, then they are allowed to provide the data remotely, and then they would take on the role as a data providing party. And in practice, that means the following. In a first step, the RDC have to implement the technical solutions, meaning the thin client, they have to check the security regulations, there's data secure room, and also involve their staff to make sure that everything works. And if they set up those technical terms, then we make connection tests. So from this terminal or computer they implemented, we will check all the remote desktop connections to all the existing data providing institutions. And then if we confirm that all of them work, so we just use test accounts for that, then we can actually integrate that new institution within the multilateral contract, and we will also integrate it in the booking platform. And only then will researchers be able to actually make appointments for this new RDC or for those secure workplaces. All right. This was a lot of theory and background, I know that. So let me tell you, where do we actually stand in praxis? I think this is the most important part. So I'm very happy to say that there were the first 3 institutions that signed this multilateral contract just last month. So it's pretty fresh. The first institutions that signed was the Socioeconomic Panel in Berlin, GESIS in Cologne and Mannheim. And then we also have IZA, which have an RDC called the EDSC in Bonn. And those are this is pretty much the first generation of the institutions that will participate. Then we have a second round. They are still working out the technical solutions, but as soon as they are finished with that, we are happy that also RWI in Essen and also the EBDC in Munich will join the network. And this will be, again, the first generation of the RDCnet, where we will slowly then start the productive operation. So we checked all the remote access connections, they work. We included all the parties that are involved within the booking platform. So what are we doing now is, well, we are looking for researchers that try out the whole system. And then for us, it's important to identify gaps, inefficiencies, see where there might be struggles in the whole process, and just optimize this whole thing. So that's where we currently stand. It's very exciting. I'm very much hoping that as like in the near future, we can offer this service more broadly to researchers, and that the whole thing starts to scale. Next, it's probably the last slide I will talk about today. Where do we want to go? So when I worked in this project for the last few years, I thought it's an absolutely great opportunity for RDCs as well as for researchers if the whole thing works. But I would also say there is still a lot of potentials which would not be used in the current state of the RDCnet, and I just want to touch on them as well. So I already mentioned if there's going to be a second funding period, we will focus on certain services that we definitely want to extend. The first thing is we as the RDCnet, we want to provide the terminals, the computers. We want to take that work away from the RDCs that want to participate because, well, if you set up a few of those terminals, it's not that hard to configure some more. It's just a scaling advantage. So what we can do is we can provide those terminals to all the institutions that want to participate. And again, then they do not have to completely build up new expertise on setting up those thin clients. We can remotely maintain them. So at the end, we have just lower barrier for institutions to participate in the RDCnet. And this goes hand in hand with the second point I have here, which is if we could manage that to provide those terminals, we could also try to target a new group of institutions, which would not be research data centers, but instead institutions without research data centers, such as universities. So if they would be able, saying, to provide a data secure room, which would be somehow controlled by members of by staff of the universities, then we could provide them with the terminals, which would allow researchers, students at a university to directly work with research data and also sensitive one, which would, in my opinion, really help in first getting more researchers into our disciplines and just increase the attractiveness as a research location for institutions, for universities. And finally, this might also be interesting for some of you. Well, we have this booking platform, and currently it can only be used by institutions that are participating in the RDCnet. But all in all, we could actually also extend it in a way that all the institutions have their own little page on that booking platform. They can define themselves their own workplaces in addition to the RDCnet workplaces. So we could actually try to make a service that is usable not only by RDCs within our network, but general with institutions of the NFDI. So if you as an institution, you need a booking platform for labs or some other workplaces, we could actually try to offer this service as well to other institutions, which might be interesting because, again, there's a scaling advantage. We have to do it anyway, so we can probably make it much cheaper than, let's say, third-party funded softwares for booking platforms and so on. But again, that's still kind of written in the stars. We are waiting for the decision on the second funding period, but I just wanted to mention that we are definitely planning to move on with the project and still define services more clearly. So there's a conclusion slide. In all honesty, I think there's nothing new. So I would actually rather just start to open the discussion. And yeah, I will already thank you for listening. Again, if you have any, you need any more information, just reach out to me. There are my information. And all right, I would just stop sharing now.
So thank you very much for this interesting talk. And with that, we say goodbye to our spectators on YouTube. Our next talk is on 2nd December, and it will be about Knowledge Graph Kitchen. So